Michael Torres never believed that a single ride could change everything. For 8 years, he'd been driving strangers to the streets of Chicago, collecting 5-star ratings and forgetting faces by the next morning. But on this particular Tuesday in November, with foreclosure notices stuffed in his glove compartment and 48 hours left before his car got repossessed, Michael picked up a passenger who would force him to confront the most dangerous truth of all. Sometimes the people we're meant to save end up saving us instead. This is the story of the last ride that became his first real journey.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The notification sound pierced through Michael Torres's morning coffee ritual like a death knell. His phone screen glowed with the familiar Uber driver interface, but today it felt different. Today, every ping could be his last. Michael stared at his reflection in the kitchen window of his cramped studio apartment. At 45, the lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent fixtures, carved by years of squinting through windshields and forcing smiles for passengers who barely acknowledged his existence. His dark hair, once thick and carefully styled for his wedding photos, now showed silver threads that caught the November sunlight filtering through dirty glass. The eviction notice on his kitchen counter seemed to mock him with its official letterhead and cold corporate language. Final notice, vehicle repossession, stamped in red ink across the top. 48 hours. That's all he had left before they took his 2016 Toyota Camry, the only thing standing between him and complete financial ruin. $3,200, that's what separated him from losing everything. 3 months of missed payments, accumulated late fees, and the crushing weight of a divorce that had bled him dry. His ex-wife Lisa had gotten the house, half his savings, and full custody of their 2 kids, Emma and David. The court-mandated child support payments ate through his Uber earnings like acid, leaving him scraping together rent money from surge pricing during weekend bar rushes. Michael's phone buzzed again. Another ride request. He grabbed his keys, a worn leather keychain that Emma had made him in 2nd grade, back when he was still daddy instead of your father in her vocabulary. The morning air bit at his face as he walked to his car, parked under a streetlight that flickered with the inconsistency of everything else in his life. The Camry's paint had faded from deep blue to a tired gray blue that matched his mood most days. A small dent on the passenger side door reminded him of the fender bender 3 weeks ago, another expense he couldn't afford, another problem he'd have to ignore. He slid into the driver's seat, adjusting the rearview mirror to catch a glimpse of himself. The man staring back looked tired, defeated. This wasn't who he'd imagined becoming when he was 25 and full of ambition, working his way through community college with dreams of opening his own business. Life had other plans. Michael accepted the ride request and pulled into traffic. The passenger pickup was at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, never a good sign. Hospital runs usually meant someone dealing with the worst day of their life, or healthcare workers too exhausted to make small talk. He preferred the latter. The city moved around him in its familiar rhythm. Chicago in November was all gray skies and bare trees, the kind of weather that made everything feel temporary and fragile. Michael had driven these streets thousands of times, watching the city change and evolve, while his own life seemed stuck in an endless loop of pick-up, drop-off, repeat. His phone rang through the Bluetooth system. Lisa's name appeared on the dashboard display, and Michael's stomach clenched. She only called when there was a problem. "Michael, we need to talk." Her voice carried that familiar edge of frustration and disappointment. "I'm working, Lisa. Can this wait? Emma needs new soccer cleats, and David's school is asking about the field trip payment. It's been 3 weeks. Michael pulled up to a red light and closed his eyes. "I told you I'd have the money by Friday." "You said that last Friday, and the Friday before that." Lisa's sigh carried the weight of their entire failed marriage. "I'm trying, Lisa. I really am." "I know you are, but trying isn't enough anymore." Her voice softened slightly. "Maybe it's time to think about getting a real job. Something stable." "A real job?" As if driving 12 hours a day, dealing with drunk passengers and navigating traffic wasn't real work? As if the 5-star rating he'd maintained for 8 years was meaningless? As if he hadn't sacrificed his back, his sleep schedule, and his social life to keep his family afloat? I have to go. I'm picking up a passenger. Michael. He ended the call and turned up the radio, letting the morning news wash over him. Another shooting on the south side. City council debating budget cuts. Weather forecast calling for rain. The same stories, different day, different year. The hospital came into view, its imposing glass and steel structure reflecting the overcast sky. Michael had made hundreds of pickups here, but something felt different today. Maybe it was the weight of impending homelessness. Or maybe it was the growing realization that at 45, this might be as good as his life would ever get. He pulled into the passenger pickup zone and checked his phone for the passenger details. Sarah C. No photo, no additional information. Just another stranger getting into his car, carrying their own problems and destinations. Michael was about to discover that Sarah C. wasn't just another passenger. She was about to become the catalyst for the most dangerous 12 hours of his life. But first, he had to survive what was waiting for him in that hospital pickup zone.
Sarah Chin appeared at the hospital's sliding glass doors, looking like someone who had just received the worst possible news. Her usually immaculate appearance, the kind that screamed successful professional, was disheveled. Her black hair, normally pulled back in a perfect bun, hung loose around her shoulders. Her navy blazer was wrinkled, and she clutched a cardboard box against her chest like it contained the remnants of her entire world. Because, in many ways, it did. Michael watched through his rearview mirror as she approached the car. He developed a sixth sense about passengers over the years, the ones who wanted to talk, the ones who preferred silence, the ones who might cause trouble. Sarah looked like she belonged in the silent contemplative category, the kind of person who would stare out the window and process whatever had happened inside those hospital walls. She opened the rear door and slumped into the seat, setting the cardboard box beside her with the careful deliberation of someone handling something precious and fragile. "Sarah?" Michael asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "That's me." Her voice was steady but hollow, like an echo in an empty room. "Where are we heading today?" Sarah gave him an address in Lincoln Park, an upscale neighborhood that confirmed Michael's initial assessment. Whatever had happened at the hospital, it had happened to someone with means, the kind of person who probably owned their apartment instead of renting, who had savings accounts and retirement plans, and all the markers of a life lived with intention and success. Michael pulled away from the hospital and merged into the morning traffic. The silence in the car was heavy, but not uncomfortable. He learned not to pry into passengers' business unless they volunteered information. Today especially, he didn't have the emotional bandwidth to absorb someone else's problems. They were stopped at a traffic light when Sarah finally spoke. "Do you ever have days when everything you thought you knew about yourself turns out to be completely wrong?" Michael glanced at her in the mirror. Her dark eyes were staring out the window, unfocused. "More often than I'd like," he admitted. "I just got fired." The words came out flat, matter of fact. 15 years building a career, and they just ended it. In a conference room that smelled like coffee and disappointment. "I'm sorry." He meant it. He knew something about watching years of work disappear overnight. "I was a therapist, specialized in trauma counseling for first responders, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, people who see the worst of humanity and somehow have to keep functioning." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Ironic, right? I spent my career helping people process catastrophic change, and now I can't even figure out how to process my own. The light turned green, and Michael accelerated gently. "What happened?" "I reported someone. A colleague who was... Let's say he had some unconventional ideas about the therapeutic relationship with female clients." Sarah's voice tightened. "Turns out whistleblowing doesn't make you a hero, it makes you a liability." Michael felt a familiar anger rising in his chest.
The same fury he'd felt when Lisa's lawyer had painted him as an unfit father during their custody hearing, when his manager at the shipping company had laid him off with 2 weeks of notice after 8 years of perfect attendance, when the system designed to protect people instead protected those with power and connections. They fired you for reporting sexual harassment? Oh, they were much more creative than that. Suddenly, my case files were incomplete. My documentation was substandard. My approach was not aligned with current best practices. Sarah opened the cardboard box and pulled out a small frame photo, herself shaking hands with someone in a suit at what looked like an award ceremony. 15 years of 5-star evaluations, and suddenly I'm incompetent. Michael recognized the bitterness in her voice. It was the same tone he used when talking about his divorce, his failed business dreams, his current situation with the car repossession. The sound of someone who had played by the rules and discovered the rules were rigged. "What's in Lincoln Park?" he asked, partly to change the subject, and partly because he was genuinely curious about where someone goes after their life implodes. "My sister's place. She's letting me stay there while I figure out what comes next. She's a lawyer, very successful, very organized, very good at fixing other people's problems. I'm about to become her latest project." They drove in silence for several minutes, navigating the morning rush hour traffic that moved through Chicago like blood through arteries, sometimes flowing smoothly, sometimes clotting into frustrating standstills that made everyone late and irritable. Michael found himself thinking about Sarah's situation. 15 years was a long time to build a career, to establish an identity around helping people, only to have it ripped away because she tried to do the right thing. It reminded him of his own moral compromises, the way he'd started cutting corners during his marriage, taking shortcuts that seemed reasonable at the time but eventually contributed to everything falling apart. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sure." "How do you do it? Drive around the city all day, dealing with strangers, pretending everything is fine?" She leaned forward slightly. "I can tell something's bothering you. It's in the way you hold your shoulders, the way you keep checking your phone. Professional hazard, I read people for a living. Or did." Michael hadn't expected to become the subject of analysis. Most passengers were too wrapped up in their own problems to notice his, but Sarah was different. Even in her own crisis, she was still trying to help others process theirs. "Today's my last day," he said, surprising himself with the admission. "Car gets repossessed tomorrow if I can't come up with $3,000.
Jesus. Sarah sat back. "I'm sorry. Here I am complaining about my career while you're about to lose your livelihood. We're both having a rough morning." "That's an understatement." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Do you have family? People who can help?" Michael thought about Emma and David, about the child support payments and soccer cleats and field trip money, about Lisa's disappointed sighs and her suggestions that he get a real job, about his own parents who had never understood his choices and had stopped calling after the divorce. It's complicated. Family usually is. They were approaching Lincoln Park now, the neighborhood where tree-lined streets and well-maintained sidewalks spoke of stability and success. The kind of place Michael used to drive through and imagine living in, back when he thought hard work and good intentions were enough to guarantee upward mobility. Sarah directed him to a brownstone with a perfectly manicured front garden and pristine steps leading to a heavy wooden door. The kind of place that whispered old money and established roots. "This is it," she said, but she made no move to get out of the car. Michael turned off the meter and shifted in his seat to face her. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing, reporting that guy. The right thing doesn't pay the bills. Maybe not, but you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror." She smiled for the first time since getting into the car. It was tired and sad, but genuine. "That's very philosophical for a Tuesday morning. 8 years of driving strangers around the city. You hear a lot of stories, learn a lot about what matters." She reached for the door handle, then paused. "Can I ask you another question?" "Shoot." "What would you do if you weren't driving for Uber? If money wasn't an issue, if you could do anything, what would make you happy?" The question caught Michael off guard. He hadn't thought about happiness as an achievable goal in years. Happiness was for other people, for people with stable jobs and healthy marriages and retirement accounts, for people who didn't wake up every morning wondering how they were going to make it through another day. But Sarah was looking at him with genuine curiosity, professional interest, like his answer mattered, like he mattered. I used to want to open my own business, auto repair shop maybe. I'm good with my hands, good at fixing things. There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again. That's not past tense, Sarah said. You still want that. I can hear it in your voice. Before Michael could respond, his phone buzzed with another ride request. The spell was broken, reality reasserted itself. Sarah gathered her cardboard box and opened the door. Thank you for the ride and for listening. Take care of yourself. She stepped out onto the sidewalk and leaned down to the passenger window. Michael, don't give up on the repair shop dream. Sometimes the biggest disasters create the biggest opportunities. As Sarah walked toward her sister's brownstone, Michael had no idea that her parting words would prove prophetic in ways neither of them could imagine. His next ride request was about to take him to a place where dreams and disasters collided in the most unexpected way.
The next ride request took Michael to a part of Chicago he knew well, the Industrial District, where his friend James Rodriguez had been running Rodriguez Auto Repair for the past 20 years. Michael stared at the address on his phone, wondering if it was coincidence or fate that had brought him here on what might be his last day as an Uber driver. James had been one of the few bright spots in Michael's recent years. A steady customer who called for rides whenever his own truck was in the shop, James treated Michael like a friend rather than just a service provider. They'd developed an easy rapport over dozens of rides, talking about everything from Chicago Bears football to the challenges of running a small business in an increasingly corporate world. As Michael pulled up to the familiar garage, he saw James standing outside, smoking a cigarette with the nervous energy of someone waiting for bad news. At 55, James still had the broad shoulders and calloused hands of someone who'd spent his life working with tools, but today he looked older somehow. Tired. "Miguel," James called out, using the nickname he'd given Michael years ago. "Right on time, hermano." Michael parked and rolled down his window. "Where are we heading today?" "Actually, I need to talk to you about something first. You got a minute?" Something in James's tone made Michael turn off the engine and get out of the car. The auto repair shop behind James looked the same as always. Organized chaos of car parts, tools, and work in progress. The hand-painted sign above the garage door reading, "Rodriguez Auto Repair. Honest work, fair prices," had faded over the years, but still carried the pride of a man who'd built something meaningful with his own hands.
What's going on, James?
"I've been getting visits. The kind of visits you don't want to get, if you know what I mean." Michael's stomach tightened. "What kind of visits?" "Production racket. Some punk kid, maybe 25, 30, comes in here talking about how dangerous this neighborhood's getting, how businesses need to be careful, how for a small monthly fee he can make sure nothing bad happens to my shop." "Jesus, James, have you called the police?" "And tell them what? That someone suggested I might want to buy insurance? These guys are smart, Miguel. They never actually threaten you directly. It's all implications and suggestions, and it would be a shame if something happened to this nice place." Michael looked around the industrial district with new eyes. It was quiet this morning, just a few other businesses opening up for the day. The kind of place where someone could cause trouble without many witnesses. "How much are they asking for?" $500 a month. Every month. James dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. "I have been running this place for 20 years, Miguel. 20 years of building relationships, earning trust, making an honest living. I employ 4 guys, support their families, and now some punk with a fake smile thinks he can just walk in here and take a piece of what I've built." Michael knew that feeling, the helpless rage of watching someone else control your destiny, of being powerless against forces bigger and more ruthless than yourself. It was the same feeling he'd had during the divorce proceedings, during the layoff at the shipping company, during every encounter with bureaucrats and corporate representatives who treated him like a number rather than a person. So what are you going to do? I don't know, hermano. I really don't know. James sat down heavily on an overturned crate. You know what the worst part is? James continued. I actually recognize the kid. Tommy Castellanos. Used to bring his car in here for oil changes when he was in high school. Nice kid. Polite to his mother. Worked part-time at the grocery store. Now he's running protection rackets like some movie gangster. Michael thought about his own kids, Emma and David, and wondered what circumstances might lead a polite teenager to become the kind of person who intimidated small business owners. Desperation, probably. The same desperation that had driven Michael to work 16-hour days during the divorce, that had made him consider taking out predatory loans just to keep his head above water. So when's he supposed to come back? Today. Said he'd stop by this afternoon for my decision. James stood up and brushed off his hands. Listen, Miguel, I don't want to drag you into this. You've got your own problems. But I was wondering, could you maybe stick around for a while? I know you charge waiting time. I'll pay it. I don't want to face this alone. Michael checked his phone. 3 more ride requests had come in while they'd been talking. Potential fares that could add up to $40 or $50 toward his impossible $3,000 goal. Every rational part of his brain said to politely decline James's request and get back on the road. But James had been there for him during some of the darkest moments of the past few years. Had listened without judgment when Michael needed to vent about the divorce. Had hired him for small jobs around the shop when regular Uber fares were slow. Had treated him like a friend when most of the world treated him like furniture. Of course I'll stay, Michael said. But I'm not charging you waiting time. Miguel! You've done plenty of favors for me over the years. Let me return one.
James smiled, and some of the tension left his shoulders. You're a good friend, hermano. They spent the next few hours in the garage, James working on a transmission repair, while Michael helped by fetching tools and making conversation. It felt good to work with his hands again, to solve mechanical problems that had clear solutions. There was something meditative about the process of diagnosing what was wrong and fixing it, something that made more sense than most of what passed for work in the modern world. Around noon, James's other employees started filtering back from lunch. Miguel Santos, a quiet 20-something who specialized in electrical systems. Carlos Restrepo, a veteran mechanic in his 40s who could make any engine purr. And Danny Kim, barely out of high school, but already showing real talent for bodywork. They all knew about the protection racket situation. Small businesses were like families in that regard. Everyone knew everyone else's problems, and secrets were hard to keep. The mood in the shop was tense, expectant. Maybe he won't show, Danny said hopefully. He'll show. These guys don't make empty promises, James replied. At 2:30 p.m., a black BMW with tinted windows pulled up outside the garage. Michael felt his heart rate increase as a young man in an expensive leather jacket got out of the passenger seat. Tommy Castellanos looked exactly like James had described. Mid-20s, handsome in a practiced way, with the kind of casual arrogance that came from never having to face real consequences for his actions. He wasn't alone. The driver of the BMW stayed behind the wheel, engine running. Michael couldn't see through the tinted windows, but the message was clear. This wasn't a solo operation. Showtime, James muttered. Tommy walked into the garage with the confident stride of someone who owned the place. He looked around approvingly, nodding at the organized workspace and quality equipment. Mr. Rodriguez, good to see you again. Tommy's smile was all teeth and no warmth. I hope you've had time to think about our conversation. I've thought about it. And? James looked at Michael, then at his employees, then back to Tommy. And I think you should leave. Tommy's practiced smile faltered for just a moment, long enough for Michael to realize that the young man hadn't expected resistance. What happened next would change everything, but not in the way anyone could have predicted. Tommy's smile returned, but it was different now. Sharper, more dangerous. Mr. Rodriguez, I think there might be some confusion here.
Tommy's voice remained friendly, conversational, but there was steel underneath. "This isn't really a negotiation. This is me doing you a courtesy by explaining how things work in this neighborhood now." "And how do things work, exactly?" James crossed his arms, and Michael could see his friend's hands trembling slightly. "Simple business arrangement. You pay for peace of mind, we make sure you have peace of mind. Very straightforward." Miguel Santos had stopped pretending to work on the electrical system he'd been troubleshooting. Carlos and Danny had also gone still, watching the conversation with the alert tension of prey animals sensing a predator. Michael found himself stepping closer to James, not really thinking about it, just responding to some instinct that said his friend needed support. Tommy noticed the movement and turned his attention to Michael for the first time. "And you are?" "Michael, I'm a friend of James's." "Just a friend?" Tommy looked him up and down, taking in the wrinkled Uber driver clothes and tired demeanor. "What do you do for work, Michael?" "I drive for Uber." Tommy laughed, a sound devoid of humor. An Uber driver. Perfect. He turned back to James. "Look, Mr. Rodriguez, I respect that you're a proud man. I respect that you've built something here. But pride doesn't protect windows from getting broken. Pride doesn't prevent accidents from happening to valuable equipment." "Are you threatening me?" James asked. "I'm explaining reality. This is a dangerous neighborhood. Things happen. Cars get vandalized, buildings catch fire, people get hurt." Tommy shrugged as if discussing the weather. "For $500 a month, we make sure those kinds of accidents don't happen to businesses we protect." Michael felt anger rising in his chest, the same helpless fury he'd experienced during every encounter with divorced lawyers and bank representatives and corporate bureaucrats who held power over his life. But this was different. This was immediate, personal, happening right in front of him to someone who mattered to him. "What if he doesn't want your protection?" Michael heard himself ask. "Excuse me? What if Mr. Rodriguez doesn't want to pay for protection he doesn't need?" "Then Mr. Rodriguez finds out why he needs it." The words hung in the air like smoke. Carlos quietly reached for his phone, probably thinking about calling 911, but Tommy noticed the movement. "I wouldn't do that, friend. Like I told Mr. Rodriguez, this is all perfectly legal, just a business conversation between entrepreneurs." Michael looked around the garage, at James's employees trying to appear invisible, at the tools and equipment that represented 20 years of honest work, at his friend's face showing fear and defeat and stubborn pride in equal measure. Something crystallized in Michael's mind, a realization that felt both terrifying and liberating. He had nothing left to lose. Tomorrow his car would be repossessed, his apartment lease was up for renewal next month, and without the Uber income, he wouldn't be able to afford it anyway. His relationship with his kids was already damaged by his financial struggles and work schedule. His ex-wife had already written him off as a failure. He was already at rock bottom, which meant he was free to act like it. "Here's what I think," Michael said, stepping forward. "I think you're a punk kid who watched too many movies and thinks intimidating hardworking people makes you tough." Tommy's easy confidence wavered. "Careful, old man. I think you've been getting away with this because you pick on people who have something to lose. People with businesses and families and reputations to protect. But here's the thing. I don't have any of that left. You know what that makes me?" "What?" "Dangerous." Michael pulled out his phone and held it up. "See this? It's been recording this entire conversation. Your name is Tommy Castellanos. Your license plate is," he glanced out the garage door at the BMW, "Illinois plates, Charlie Delta 7928. You just confessed to running a protection racket on video." "You can't." "I can and I did. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to get in your fancy car and drive away. You're going to forget this place exists. And if anything at all happens to Mr. Rodriguez or his business, this video goes to every police station, newspaper, and social media platform in Chicago." "You have no idea who you're messing with." "I have no idea who you're messing with either. I'm a man with nothing left to lose who just found something worth protecting. That makes me the most dangerous person you'll meet today." Tommy looked around the garage, taking in the faces of James and his employees, the recording phone in Michael's hand, the situation that had suddenly spun beyond his control. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Michael replied. Tommy backed towards the garage door, then turned and walked quickly to the BMW. He could see him talking animatedly to whoever was in the driver's seat as they pulled away. The silence that followed was deafening. "Miguel, what the hell did you just do?" James finally said. Michael looked at his phone, ending the recording. "I have no idea." Carlos was the first to laugh, a nervous sound that broke the tension. Then Danny joined in, and soon the whole garage was filled with slightly hysterical laughter from men who had just witnessed something impossible. "Did you see his face?" Miguel Santos gasped between laughs. I can't believe he actually backed down," Danny added it. But James wasn't laughing. He was staring at Michael with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. Probably. But I meant what I said. I really don't have anything left to lose." "You have your life." Michael considered that. Did he really? What kind of life was driving 12 hours a day just to stay broke? What kind of life was seeing his kids every other weekend and watching them grow distant? What kind of life was accepting that failure was permanent and dreams were for other people? Maybe. But maybe that's not the kind of life worth protecting. James walked over to a small office area in the corner of the garage and returned with 2 bottles of beer from a mini fridge. He handed one to Michael. "To standing up to bullies," he said, raising his bottle. "To having nothing left to lose," Michael replied. They clinked bottles and drank, and for the first time in years, Michael felt something that might have been pride. Michael had no way of knowing that Tommy Castellanos didn't give up easily, or that the young man's next move would force Michael to discover just how much he was willing to risk for the people he cared about.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The celebration in the garage was short-lived. Within an hour, James's paranoia started to set in. "What if they come back?" he asked for the 3rd time, pacing between workbenches. "What if they bring more people? What if they decide to make an example out of me?" Michael understood the fear. Bullies didn't like being humiliated, especially in front of witnesses. Tommy Castellanos had lost face today, and people like him usually found ways to restore it. "We'll deal with that if it happens," Michael said. But even as he spoke the words, he realized how hollow they sounded. What was his plan, exactly? Keep recording every interaction? Hope the police would care about a protection racket targeting a small business in an industrial district? His phone buzzed with ride requests that he continued to ignore. The logical part of his brain screamed that he was wasting precious earning time, that every minute spent in this garage was another dollar he wouldn't have when the repo man came tomorrow. But the larger part of him, the part that had been dormant for years, refused to leave James alone to face whatever consequences might follow. Around 4 p.m., James's employees started getting ready to leave for the day. Carlos and Danny lived in the neighborhood and usually walked home together. Miguel had a long bus commute to the north side. "Maybe you guys should take tomorrow off," James suggested. "Let things cool down." "We can't afford to take days off any more than you can," Carlos pointed out. "Besides, if we let punks like that scare us away from our jobs, what's next?" It was a good question. Michael thought about Sarah's situation at the hospital, how trying to do the right thing had cost her everything she'd worked for, how the system seemed to design to punish people who stood up to corruption and reward those who looked the other way. "I'll drive you guys home," Michael offered. "Make sure you get there safely." "What about the meter?" "Don't worry about it." As they prepared to leave, James pulled Michael aside. "I can't ask you to keep doing this, hermano. You've got your own problems." "You're not asking. I'm offering." "Why?" It was a fair question. Michael had been asking himself the same thing. Why risk getting involved in something that could turn dangerous? Why sacrifice potential earnings to play bodyguard for a friend? Why care about someone else's problems when his own were overwhelming? "Because," Michael said slowly,
working it out as he spoke. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, something more important than just surviving from one day to the next. James nodded, understanding. That makes sense. But Miguel, these aren't street punks we're dealing with. Protection rackets don't operate in isolation. There's organization behind this, money, connections. If we've made an enemy, then we'll face it together. Michael drove Miguel, Carlos, and Danny to their respective homes, taking different routes each time, and checking his mirrors for any signs they were being followed. The BMW didn't reappear, but that didn't mean they were safe. It might just mean Tommy and his associates were being more careful. By the time he returned to the garage, the sun was setting, and James was locking up for the day. The older man looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the afternoon's confrontation having worn off and left him drained. "Come on," Michael said. "I'll give you a ride home." "I don't want to impose." "James, you're not imposing." They drove through the gathering dusk in comfortable silence, James directing him through a neighborhood of modest houses with well-maintained yards and the comfortable look of working-class stability. The kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors, and kids still played in the streets until their mothers called them in for dinner. "Maria's making tamales tonight," James said, as they pulled up to a small house with a front porch decorated with potted plants. "You should come in, eat something. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in days." Michael realized James was right. He'd been surviving on gas station coffee and vending machine snacks for weeks, too stressed and busy to think about proper nutrition. His stomach rumbled at the mention of homemade tamales. "I don't want to intrude on your family time." "Miguel, you just saved my business. Maybe my life. Maria will never forgive me if I don't bring you in for dinner." Michael found himself accepting, partly because he was genuinely hungry, and partly because the alternative was returning to his empty apartment to stare at eviction notices and calculate impossible math. Maria Rodriguez was exactly what James Michael had expected from his stories. A small, fierce woman with graying hair and the kind of warm smile that made strangers feel like family. She took one look at Michael and immediately began fussing over him, insisting he was too thin and needed feeding up. "This is Miguel," James explained in Spanish, "the friend I told you about." "The Uber driver?" Maria switched to English, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "The one who helps you today?" "That's him." Maria's entire demeanor shifted. She grabbed Michael's face in both hands and kissed his forehead, a gesture so maternal and unexpected that Michael felt his eyes water. "You're family now," she declared. "Anyone who protects my James is family." The dinner table was set for 4. James and Maria's 2 adult children were at their own homes. But Maria piled Michael's plate high with tamales, rice, beans, and fresh salsa. The food was incredible, seasoned with care and love in ways that reminded Michael of his own childhood, before life became complicated and relationships became transactions. "James tells me your car might be taken away," Maria said over dinner, her directness softened by genuine concern. "Tomorrow, unless I can come up with $3,000. And then what will you do?" I have been avoiding that question for weeks. "I don't know. Find another job, I guess. Start over." "What did you do before driving for Uber?" "Worked at a shipping company for 8 years. Before that, community college. I was studying business, thought about opening my own shop someday." James and Maria exchanged a look that Michael couldn't interpret. "What kind of shop?" James asked. "Auto repair, maybe? I've always been good with my hands, good at fixing things. But that was years ago. A different lifetime." "Not so different," James said quietly. They ate in comfortable conversation, James and Maria sharing stories about their kids and grandchildren, Michael finding himself relaxing for the first time in months. It felt good to be part of a family dinner, even temporarily, to remember what it was like to belong somewhere. After dinner, James walked Michael back to the car. "Listen, hermano, I've been thinking about what happened today, about what you did. Don't read too much into it. I was probably just having a breakdown and it happened to work out. Maybe. Or maybe you reminded yourself who you used to be,
who you still are underneath all the struggle and disappointment. I don't know how to respond to that. I have a proposition for you. I've been thinking about expanding the business, adding a pickup and delivery service for customers who can't bring their cars in during business hours. Senior citizens, busy professionals, people who need rides while their cars are being serviced. James, hear me out. I need someone I trust to run that side of the operation. Someone who knows the city, who's good with customers, who can handle the business end of things. James paused. Someone who's not afraid to stand up for what's right. Michael stared at his friend. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Small percentage at first, but with room to grow. You'd handle the transport side, I'd handle the repair side. We split the profits fairly. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Michael couldn't process it immediately. James, I can't afford to buy into a partnership. I'm about to be homeless. Who said anything about buying in? You'd earn your share by working, by building something together. Michael felt something shift inside his chest, like a door opening after being locked for years. Why would you do this? Because you reminded me today that some things are worth fighting for. And because, Maria's right, you're family now. They stood in the gathering darkness, two middle-aged men, contemplating the possibility of new beginnings. I need to think about it, Michael said, though part of him wanted to accept immediately. Of course, but Miguel, don't think too long. Sometimes opportunities have expiration dates. As Michael drove home that night, he had no idea that Tommy Castellanos had spent the evening making phone calls to people who didn't appreciate being embarrassed by Uber drivers. The real test of Michael's courage was yet to come.
Michael woke up Wednesday morning to the sound of someone pounding on his apartment door. For a moment, lying in the narrow bed of his studio apartment, he wondered if the repo men had decided to collect their debt personally. Then he heard James's voice calling his name. "Miguel, open up, hermano!" Michael stumbled to the door in his underwear and t-shirt, unlocking the chain and deadbolt. James stood in the hallway, fully dressed but disheveled, his face pale with anxiety. "They hit the shop," James said without preamble. Michael's blood went cold. "When?" "Sometime last night. Maria called me at 5 this morning. The alarm company reached her first." James ran his hands through his hair. "Windows broken, tools stolen, chemicals poured all over the floor. 20 years of building something, and they destroyed it in one night." Michael grabbed clothes from a chair and started dressing quickly. "How bad?" "Bad. Insurance might cover some of it, but—" James's voice broke slightly. "Miguel, they took the specialty tools, the diagnostic computers, the stuff I've been collecting for decades. Some of it belonged to my father. They knew exactly what to take to hurt me the most." As they drove toward the garage, James filled in more details. The security system had been professionally disabled. The vandalism was thorough but calculated, designed to cause maximum financial damage while sending a clear message. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no evidence that would be useful to police. "Did you call the cops?" Michael asked. "Yeah. They took a report, said they'd investigate, gave me a case number. You know how it goes." Michael did know. The same bureaucratic indifference he'd encountered during his divorce, during his layoff, during every interaction with institutions that were supposedly designed to help, but mostly served to document failure. The garage was worse than James had described. Broken glass crunched under their feet as they surveyed the damage. Every window had been smashed, but carefully, the kind of precise destruction that spoke of professional vandalism rather than random violence. Tool chests had been emptied, their contents either stolen or scattered. A caustic chemical smell hung in the air from fluids that had been poured across work surfaces and equipment. But it was the personal touches that hit hardest. A photo of James's father, who had started the business in this same location, lay in pieces among the glass. A child's drawing, probably from one of James's grandchildren, had been deliberately torn in half and left on the floor. Jesus, James, I'm so sorry. They left something for you, James said quietly, pointing to the office area. On James's desk, held down by a wrench, was a piece of paper with Michael's name written in block letters. The message inside was simple. Uber driver, mind your own business, or next time it's your family. Michael's hands shook as he read the note. Emma and David. They knew about his kids. How did they find out about your children? James asked, reading over his shoulder. It's not hard to find information these days, Michael said, though his voice sounded hollow to his own ears. Social media, public records, school enrollment. He trailed off, realizing the implications. These weren't street thugs acting on impulse. This was organized, researched, deliberate. His phone rang. Lisa's number on the caller ID. Michael, there were some men asking about you at Emma's school yesterday. The principal called me. They claimed to be from your insurance company wanting to verify enrollment information. Michael's stomach dropped. What did the school tell them? Nothing, thank God. But Michael, who were these people? What have you gotten yourself into? Michael looked around the destroyed garage, at James's 20 years of work reduced to rubble and ruin, at the note threatening his children. I'll handle it. That's not an answer. If you've put Emma and David in danger, I said I'll handle it. Michael ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Sarah Chen answered on the second ring. Michael, I didn't expect to hear from you again. I need your help. Professional help. I think I'm having a breakdown and I'm about to do something that might get people hurt. There was a pause. Where are you? Michael gave her the address of the garage. Can you come? I know you're not working right now, but I'll be there in 20 minutes. While they waited for Sarah, Michael and James began the grim process of assessing the damage. The destruction was comprehensive but surgical. Every piece of equipment necessary to run the business had been damaged or stolen, but the building's structural elements were untouched. The message was clear. This could be repaired if James was willing to accept the new terms of doing business in his neighborhood. Carlos and Danny arrived for work and stood in shocked silence at the threshold. Miguel Santos took one look at the damage and started crying, not just for the destroyed workplace, but for the violation of something that had represented security and dignity in their lives. What do we do now? Danny asked. Before James could answer, Sarah's car pulled up outside. She took in the scene quickly, her therapist training allowing her to process the emotional dynamics instantly. This is about yesterday, she said to Michael. It wasn't a question. Yeah. Sarah looked around the destroyed garage, then at James and his employees, then back at Michael. And now they're threatening your children. How did you... It's written all over your face. Classic escalation pattern and intimidation tactics. Sarah's voice shifted into professional mode. They hit the business first to demonstrate capability. The threat to family is designed to break your resistance completely. It's working, Michael admitted. Good, Sarah said, surprising everyone. That means you still have perspective. The dangerous response would be to escalate back. So what do I do? Let them win? Let James lose everything he's built because I couldn't mind my own business? You stand up to them, Sarah said simply, but not the way you're thinking. Sarah spent the next hour interviewing Michael, James, and the employees, asking detailed questions about the timeline of events, the specific threats made, the pattern of escalation. She took notes on her phone, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to the defeated woman who had climbed into Michael's car 2 days earlier. Here's what we're dealing with, she announced finally. This is a sophisticated intimidation operation. They've done psychological profiles on both of you, identified your pressure points, and designed their response to achieve maximum emotional impact with minimal legal exposure. So they win, James said heavily. Not necessarily. They made one crucial mistake. What's that? Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving. They assumed you'd respond emotionally instead of strategically.
They assumed you'd either back down or escalate into violence. They didn't plan for a third option, which is
Sarah's plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Social media, she explained, setting up her phone to record video. We document everything: the destroyed business, the timeline of intimidation, the threat to Michael's children. We make this story go viral. That's insane, James protested. These people already prove they know where we live, where our families are. If we publicly humiliate them, they become too visible to operate effectively, Sarah finished. Protection rackets depend on staying under the radar. Once the spotlight is on them, they become a liability to whoever they work for. Michael wasn't convinced. What if you're wrong? What if publicity just makes them angrier? Then at least when something happens to us, everyone will know who did it. Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact. Right now, they can hurt you with impunity because nobody knows they exist. Make them famous, and suddenly they have to answer for their actions. It was a high-stakes gamble. But as Michael looked around the destroyed garage, at James's defeated expression and his employees' fear, he realized they were already at the bottom. The only direction left was up or out. "What do you need from us?" he asked. Sarah spent the next 2 hours orchestrating what she called controlled truth-telling. She interviewed each person involved, recording their stories with the skills of someone who understood narrative structure and emotional impact. James talked about building his business over 20 years, about employing local people and serving his community honestly. Carlos, Danny, and Miguel shared what the job meant to them, how the garage had been a source of stability and pride in their lives. Michael's interview was the hardest. Sarah pushed him to articulate not just what had happened, but why he had chosen to get involved. "I spent 8 years driving strangers around this city, 8 years watching other people live their lives while mine fell apart. I got divorced, lost my house, barely see my kids. I was about to lose my car, my job, everything. I had hit rock bottom. So why didn't you just walk away when the protection racket showed up? Because James is my friend. Because his employees depend on this place for their livelihoods. Because sometimes you reach a point where doing nothing becomes more painful than doing something. Even when doing something puts your children at risk?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. "Especially then. What kind of father would I be if I taught my kids that bullies always win, that honest people should just accept being victims?" Sarah asked the hardest question last. "What do you want people who watch this to do?" "I want them to remember that we're all connected, that when someone attacks a small business in your community, they're attacking everyone who depends on that business, the employees, the customers, the families who rely on those jobs. I want people to remember that ordinary citizens have power if they choose to use it." By late afternoon, Sarah had assembled the raw footage into a compelling narrative. The video started with the destroyed garage, then flashed back to tell the story chronologically, ending with Michael's call to action. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked before uploading the video to multiple social media platforms. "Once this goes live, there's no taking it back." Michael looked at James, who nodded grimly. "Do it." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 hours, the video had been shared hundreds of times. Local news stations started calling. Other small business owners began commenting with their own stories of intimidation and protection rackets. But the comment from user Chicago reporter Lisa changed everything. "This is Lisa Martinez from Channel 7 News. We've been investigating organized crime in small business districts for months. Can you contact us immediately? We think your story connects to something much larger." Lisa Martinez turned out to be an investigative journalist who had been tracking a network of protection rackets operating throughout Chicago's industrial and commercial districts.
What looked like isolated incidents were actually part of a coordinated operation run by a middle-level crime syndicate with connections to city officials and law enforcement. "Your video broke the case open," she told Michael and James during an emergency meeting at the news station that evening. "We've been trying to get business owners to go on record for 8 months. Everyone was too scared, but your story gave other people courage to speak up." The investigation that followed moved with surprising speed. Federal authorities who had been building a case against the syndicate for years suddenly had witnesses willing to testify. Tommy Castellanos, it turned out, was a small fish in a much larger pond, and when faced with federal charges, he was very eager to provide information about his bosses in exchange for leniency. But the most unexpected development came from Michael's own family. Lisa called him Thursday evening, her tone completely different from their recent conversations. "I saw the news story," she said quietly. "Emma and David saw it too." "Lisa, I can explain." "You don't need to explain. I didn't realize." She paused, searching for words. "The kids are proud of you, Michael. Really proud. Emma wants to know if she can come help clean up Mr. Rodriguez's garage this weekend." "She does?" "She said her daddy stood up to bad guys like a superhero." "David wants to know if you're going to keep being brave." "I don't feel very brave." "That's what makes it brave," Lisa said. "Michael, I owe you an apology. I've been so focused on stability and security that I've forgotten about courage and principle. The kids need to see that their father is someone who stands up for what's right, even when it's hard." "Does this mean—" "It means we need to talk, really talk, about custody, about support, about giving our kids a chance to know who their father really is."
6 months later, Michael stood in the doorway of Rodriguez and Torres Auto Repair, watching his business partner James explain the new hydraulic lift system to a potential customer. The rebuilt garage was larger than before, equipped with modern diagnostic tools and expanded to include a customer lounge, where people could wait comfortably for their vehicles to be serviced. The insurance settlement from the vandalism had covered most of the rebuilding costs, but it was the community support that had made the real difference. Local businesses had donated materials and labor. Customers had started a crowdfunding campaign that raised enough money to upgrade all the equipment. The story of their resistance to the protection racket had become a symbol of small business resilience in Chicago. Michael's phone buzzed with a pickup notification, not from Uber, but from their own scheduling app. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly customer who lived alone and couldn't drive after dark, needed her car picked up for a brake service appointment. It was exactly the kind of service James had envisioned when he offered Michael the partnership. Transportation solutions that complemented the repair business and served the community's real needs. The transition from Uber driver to small business owner hadn't been seamless. Michael had kept driving for another month while they rebuilt the garage, splitting his time between ride requests and learning the administrative side of the auto repair business. The car repo had been canceled when James co-signed a loan modification, giving Michael breathing room to stabilize his finances. More importantly, his relationship with Emma and David had begun healing. They spent every other weekend at the garage now, Emma helping with customer service while David learned basic mechanical skills from James. They were proud to tell their friends that their dad owned a business, that he had stood up to criminals, that he was building something meaningful. The custody arrangement had changed too. Lisa, genuinely impressed by Michael's transformation and stability, had agreed to a more balanced schedule that gave him time to be an active father while maintaining his business responsibilities. "You ready for the Henderson pickup?" James called from across the garage. "On my way!" Michael grabbed the keys to the company van, a clean, professional vehicle with Rodriguez and Torres Auto Repair painted on the sides in crisp blue letters. It was a far cry from his old Camry with its faded paint and uncertain future. As he drove through the familiar streets of Chicago, Michael thought about Sarah Chen. She had started her own private practice, specializing in trauma recovery for people whose lives had been disrupted by crime and corruption. Her first client had been Michael himself, helping him process the emotions and stress of standing up to organized crime and rebuilding his life. thing about trauma, she had told him during one of their sessions, is that it forces you to discover who you really are underneath all the roles and expectations and compromises you've made. Sometimes that person is stronger than you ever imagined. Sarah had been right about the psychological impact of their social media strategy. The crime syndicate, faced with federal investigation and public scrutiny, had collapsed within months. Tommy Castellanos was serving 18 months in minimum security prison and had agreed to testify against his former associates. The other protection rackets in the area had quietly shut down rather than risk similar exposure. But the most profound change had been internal. Michael had discovered that he enjoyed running a business, that he had natural instincts for customer service and operational efficiency. James handled the technical aspects of auto repair, while Michael managed scheduling, customer relations, and the transportation services. They were planning to expand again next year, possibly adding a second location. Mrs. Henderson was waiting on her front porch when Michael arrived, her 2018 Honda Civic parked in the narrow driveway of her well-maintained bungalow. "Right on time as always," she said, handing him the keys. "I don't know what I'd do without your pickup service." "Happy to help, Mrs. Henderson. James says it should just be a routine brake pad replacement. We'll have you back on the road by tomorrow afternoon. You boys have been such a blessing to this neighborhood. Ever since that terrible business with those criminals, it's felt safer knowing there are people like you looking out for the community." As Michael drove Mrs. Henderson's car back to the garage, he reflected on how much had changed since that Tuesday morning when he picked up Sarah at the hospital. He had been driving toward rock bottom then, convinced that his life was a series of failures and disappointments that would never improve. But Sarah had been right about disasters creating opportunities. The protection racket crisis had forced him to discover reserves of courage and principle he didn't know he possessed. It had shown him that sometimes the biggest risks led to the greatest rewards, that standing up for others was really a way of standing up for yourself. The business was thriving, but more than that, Michael felt like he was contributing something meaningful to his community. They provided honest automotive services at fair prices, employed local people at decent wages, and offered convenient services that helped elderly and busy customers maintain their independence and mobility. His relationship with his children continued to improve. Emma, now 12, had shown a real aptitude for customer service and talked about studying business in college. David, 10 years old and fascinated by how things worked, spent every visit taking apart and reassembling small engines under James' patient supervision. Even his relationship with Lisa had evolved into something approaching friendship. She had started bringing her own car to Rodriguez and Torres for service and occasionally joined them for family dinners at James and Maria's house. The hostility and resentment that had defined their interactions during and after the divorce had given way to mutual respect and shared commitment to their children's well-being. Michael pulled into the garage bay and got out of Mrs. Henderson's car. James was training Danny on a complex transmission repair, patiently explaining each step of the diagnostic process. Carlos and Miguel were working together on an engine rebuild, their conversation a mixture of Spanish and English and the universal language of skilled craftsmen solving problems together. This was what success looked like, Michael realized. Not a mansion or a luxury car or a 7-figure bank account, but a business that served its community, employees that took pride in their work, and the knowledge that he was building something that would outlast him. His phone rang. Sarah's number appeared on the screen. "How's the business owner life treating you?" "No complaints. How's private practice?" "Growing every month. Turns out there are a lot of people in Chicago who need help putting their lives back together after traumatic experiences." They talked for a few minutes about their respective businesses, about the ongoing federal investigation that continued to uncover corruption in city government, and about the small but meaningful ways their lives had improved since that crisis 6 months ago. "I have a confession," Sarah said before ending the call. "What's that?" "I never actually needed a ride to Lincoln Park that morning. I had my own car parked at the hospital." Michael was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Then why?" "Because I could tell you were someone struggling with the same things I was struggling with. Loss, disappointment, feeling like the system was rigged against people who try to do the right thing. I thought maybe we could help each other figure out what comes next." "And did we?" "I think we did. Sometimes the best way to save yourself is to save someone else first."
After Sarah hung up, Michael stood in the garage surrounded by the sounds of productive work and honest labor. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows they'd installed during the rebuilding, illuminating the professional workspace they created from the ashes of vandalism and intimidation. James approached with a customer invoice for Mrs. Henderson's brake service. "Good pickup?" he asked. "Perfect pickup. Ready for whatever comes next." James smiled and handed him the clipboard. "That's the right attitude, partner. That's exactly the right attitude." As Michael filled out the service paperwork, he thought about the message he would want to leave for anyone facing their own crisis of confidence and purpose. Sometimes your lowest moment is actually the beginning of your greatest transformation. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to discover what you actually need. And sometimes the courage to stand up for others is really the courage to stand up for the person you're meant to become. The last ride had become the first day of a completely different life.
Epilogue, 1 year later. The grand reopening of Rodriguez and Torres Auto Repair drew a crowd that spilled out onto the sidewalk. Michael stood beside the ribbon that stretched across the entrance to their new second location, watching Mayor Johnson prepare to make the ceremonial cut. The irony wasn't lost on him. A year ago, he'd been an invisible Uber driver on the verge of homelessness. Now he was shaking hands with city officials at the opening of his own business. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor announced to the gathered crowd of customers, employees, and local media, "it gives me great pleasure to officially open the newest location of Rodriguez and Torres Auto Repair, a business that represents the very best of Chicago's entrepreneurial spirit and community resilience." The crowd applauded as James cut the ribbon, his grin wide enough to split his face. Maria stood beside him, tears of pride streaming down her cheeks. Their success story had become legendary in the neighborhood, the small business that fought back against organized crime and won. Michael spotted Sarah in the crowd, standing near the back with her arms crossed and a knowing smile on her face. She had become more than just a therapist and business advisor. She was the architect of their transformation, the person who had seen potential in two broken men and helped them rebuild their lives into something better. Emma and David pushed through the crowd to stand beside their father, Emma carrying a bouquet of flowers and David wearing a miniature Rodriguez and Torres polo shirt that Maria had specially ordered for him. "Dad," Emma whispered, tugging on his sleeve, "are you famous now?" Michael laughed and picked up his 10-year-old son, balancing him on his hip. "No, sweetheart, I'm just someone who learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters." "What really matters?" David asked, with a serious curiosity of a child. Michael looked around at the crowd of people celebrating their success, at James cutting the ceremonial ribbon, at his children's faces filled with pride, at Sarah giving him a thumbs up from the back of the crowd. Lisa appeared at his elbow, having driven across town to attend the opening. Their relationship had evolved far beyond mere co-parenting. They had become genuine friends, united by their shared love for their children and mutual respect for the people they had each worked to become. "The kids have been talking about this all week," she said, smiling. "Emma wants to work here when she turns 16. She'd be good at it. She's got your head for business and my stubborn streak when it comes to helping people." "That's a dangerous combination," Lisa laughed. As the crowd began to filter into the garage for tours and refreshments, Michael found himself standing alone for a moment, watching his friends and family celebrate this milestone. Tommy Castellanos was serving the remainder of his sentence in federal prison. The crime syndicate that had terrorized small businesses throughout Chicago had been dismantled, its leaders facing decades behind bars. The neighborhood felt safer, more connected, more hopeful. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw the news story about your grand opening. You probably don't remember me, but I was one of your Uber passengers about a year ago. You were kind to me during a really difficult time in my life. Seeing what you've built since then gives me hope that maybe I can turn my life around too. Thank you for showing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. A grateful stranger." Michael stared at the message, remembering all the passengers he'd driven during his 8 years behind the wheel. Hundreds of people, thousands of conversations, moments of human connection that he thought were forgotten as soon as the ride ended. But maybe nothing was really forgotten. Maybe every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every decision to help rather than ignore, created ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could see or measure. Sarah appeared at his side,
following his gaze toward the celebration happening inside the garage. Having second thoughts about leaving the simple life of an Uber driver? She asked, her tone playful, but her eyes serious. Never, Michael said firmly. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Good, because I have another confession to make. What's that? I've been getting calls from small business owners in other cities, people who heard about what we did here, who are facing similar problems with organized crime and corruption. They want to know how to fight back without putting their families at risk. And, Michael turned to her face fully, and I think we might have accidentally created a model that could work anywhere. Strategic truth-telling, community organizing, using social media to shine light on problems that thrive in darkness. Sarah paused. I'm thinking about writing a book, maybe starting a consulting firm that helps communities stand up to organized crime. That sounds like it could be dangerous. Probably, but you know what's more dangerous? Sarah smiled. Letting bullies win because good people are too afraid to fight back. Michael looked at his children playing with James's grandchildren in the garage, at the employees who had steady jobs and pride in their work, at the customers who felt safe bringing their cars to a business they trusted. What would you need from me, he asked. A co-author who knows what it feels like to risk everything for what's right. Someone who can speak to ordinary people about finding extraordinary courage. Michael thought about the Uber driver that he had been a year ago, broke, defeated, convinced that his best days were behind him. That man would never have imagined standing at the grand reopening of his own business, surrounded by family and friends, being asked to help other communities fight injustice. But that man had also possessed something he didn't recognize at the time, the capacity to change, to grow, to become someone better than he ever had imagined possible. When do we start, he asked. Sarah's smile lit up her entire face. How about right now? As the celebration continued around them, Michael felt the familiar sensation of standing at the beginning of something new and uncertain and full of possibility. The scared Uber driver was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't taking risks. It was accepting that things could never get better. The last ride had ended. The next adventure was just beginning. The end.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.